Let's turn and sing song number 968. 968. Nine, 6, 8. Oh, they tell me of a home far beyond the skies. Oh, they tell me of a home far away. Oh, they tell me of a home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. Oh, the land of cloudless day. Oh, the land of an unclouded sky. Oh, they tell me of a home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. Oh, they tell me that Lord, my friends have gone. Oh, they tell me of that land far away, where the tree of life in eternal bloom sheds its fragrance through the unclouded day. Oh, the land of cloudless day. Oh, the land of an unclouded sky. Oh, they tell me of a home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. Oh, they tell me that he smiles on his children there. His smile drives their sorrows away. And they tell me that no tears ever come again in that lovely land of unclouded day. Oh, the land of cloudless day. Oh, the land of an unclouded sky. Oh, they tell me of a home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. Amen. Well, I'm thankful that there will be unclouded days there, and I'm thankful that we have had some cloudy days here. We've had some good rain, good soaking rain, and it's not much better than that. Just thank God for that. Glad to see you this morning. I love studying for these lessons on what happened during the last week of Christ. And I want you to know I'm really excited to get to next week's lesson. I have been working on it so much I'm going to try not to talk about it. But I don't want to skip any important thing as we look at the last week in the life of Jesus Christ. Jesus had spent the Tuesday before he was crucified on that Friday teaching his disciples and debating with the Jewish religious leaders. They were determined to make him look foolish. They were determined to turn the people against him. But every time they tried to trap Jesus, the people would look at Jesus and go, "Boy, that was a great answer. That was really smart." They'd look at their Jewish religious leaders going, "Why don't y'all seem to know anything?" And it wasn't working out the way they thought. The Jewish leaders now know there's only one way to get rid of Jesus. They can't turn the crowd against him, so they're going to have to make him a criminal. They're going to have to say he broke all these laws, all these rules. And then and only then will the people turn on Jesus. And that turned out to be exactly true. All the time they were dealing with him straight face to face. Jesus won every argument. When they couldn't win one, they instead turned a crowd of followers into a mob to take the life of Jesus Christ. After the Jewish leaders leave, Jesus looks over the city of Jerusalem and weeps. He knows what's coming. There are two different times where Jesus cries. One is at the death of his friend Lazarus, as he sees Mary and Martha mourning and weeping for him. He mourns and weeps with them. I think that's important because it tells us that we have a Lord who cries with us. And I think that's important. But Jesus, knowing what was coming ahead, he wept for Jerusalem. It was the center of the world to them. And he knew that in about 40 years, Jerusalem would be wiped out. The seat of all Israel would be destroyed. The nation would crumble around it. And he knew from that moment on, everything was going to change. Instead of being about Jerusalem and Israel and that being God's holy people, it was going to be about the kingdom of God everywhere that would be God's chosen people. But he loved his people. He loved the Jews. He was doing everything he could to save them, and it broke his heart that they were about to go through something so difficult and so hard. Someone asked me the other day if I was still sad about what's going on in Ukraine. Yeah, I'm still sad. I really care about the people there. Don't you, Patty? We care about those people. And every time they get on TV and they're talking about all the politics of the whole thing, I just sit there and think about faces of people. And when you care about people, you can't stand to see them hurt like that. 9/11 didn't happen here in Wichita Falls. But do you remember how we hurt? I hurt, and I was in Ukraine at the time because we love our nation. And we can point out all the mistakes of it and all the bad things. We love it, and that's the way Jesus is, and he weeps for it. But the nation wasn't about ground and land. It was about the people there. In AD 70, in the year 70, Jerusalem will be completely destroyed. There will be many killed, millions killed. And the temple will be completely destroyed, not one brick laying on top of another. Jesus was standing on a mount outside of the city. At this point, he was on his way back. He was going back and forth between the Mount of Olives. And probably before he gets to the Mount of Olives, or it would have said it, he turns around and you can look over the east wall and you can see the temple. That'll break your heart. As he walked back into town, as he moved through, he looked at the temple. But that wasn't the most important thing. It was those people. Matthew chapter 23, verse 37 through 39 says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under his wings, and you were not willing? See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" He was in a nation that has left God. They talk about God, and they have people that say, "Oh yes, we're the people of God," but they're not doing what God would say. Can you imagine living in a country whose institutions had forgotten about God? Where God was no longer the heart of the government when God had blessed that nation so very much? Can you imagine anything like that? I think we all can. And I think it should drive us to tears. Because when a nation leaves God, God has no choice but to leave that nation. And that's what's happening at this time in history. These are some of the saddest words of all the Bible. He loved the city. He loved the people. He knew that the Romans were going to come to kill and destroy them. They've earned it. But it hurts. We're in a nation that in many ways has left God behind. It's in my lifetime that the church went from being about as big as it was going to be to congregations leaving the Lord's church and taking on the things of the denominations around them, of people who used to, when you'd wake up on Sunday morning, pretty much most of your community was going to go to a house of worship. Now, few do. There are far less people attending worship anywhere right now all across the United States, and that includes here in Wichita Falls as well. We weep. It sort of makes me mad, and it made Jesus mad. At the same time, you love the people, and you hurt for them. Jesus said, I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. He looks at Jerusalem and says, I would love to gather all yours together under protection of my wings and save them from this, but the truth is, God's judgment is righteous, and it's coming. He paints a picture that they would understand. Hens and chicks were common in the city and in the country. Do you know, most of the countries I went and visited, all across Africa and Asia and all that, chickens ran everywhere. There were way more chickens than there were stray dogs. And they perform a real service. They clean up a lot of stuff. They get rid of a lot of insects, all those things. And Jerusalem at this time was no different. Chickens would come home to roost, and then they would go out and forage all during the day. And he uses an example of a hen and her chicks in a rainstorm. I want to share a story that was told to me by a friend who raised chickens where I grew up in the Texas Panhandle. We didn't raise chickens because chickens go to the bathroom everywhere. And that was a problem for my dad. But most of the people around us had chickens, and I was glad because we could trade and get their eggs. A rainstorm came. Water started running down all the crevices and gullies in the farmyard. When a big rain would come, it would just sort of create little rivers that would go in through the dirt because the dirt was loose, and it would create these little streams that would go through. There were a bunch of little yellow chicks out running around in the yard. The mother, seeing the wind, or feeling the wind, seeing the rain, she went up to a high point, which where I grew up isn't very high, but it's still high. She got out there and she spread her wings as far as they would go, and she began to cluck for her chicks to come and get under her wings. I've seen it so many different times, but the mother hen will sacrifice herself to take care of her chicks. It's a beautiful thing about them. It's not known what she was saying to her chicks. But I can just imagine that she's calling out to them, maybe even by name, and begging them, saying, if you'll just come get under my wings, the rain won't touch you. If you'll stay up here on this high point, you won't get caught in any of these little current streams that's running around us. Just come here, come to Mom, and everything is going to be all right. Pretty soon, more and more water came down the crevice, and there was a little chick caught on the other side. He realized way too late he needed to go to his mom, so he tried to cross that stream of water going through that farmyard, and it swept him away. It had refused to come to the protection of the mother's wings until it was too late. The mother did not chase that chick, because if she put her wings down to run and protect this one chick, then all the other chicks that were gathering underneath her wings, they would die. God had to let Jerusalem fall. They would not listen to him saying, come to me and you'll receive help. So they had to fall. He's got people scattered across the nations that will now become his holy city, his holy nation. In AD 70, there's no more time for listening. You're either under the protection of Jesus and God, or you're on your own and you're going to get swept up in a very painful, desolate time. This week and next week we'll talk about that. Next week we're going to primarily be talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and using some verses that many people think refer to the end of time, but they don't. They obviously don't. But we're going to go through and talk about those things together. But knowing what was about to happen, Jesus wept. He loved his people. He wanted to save them. Jesus goes the rest of the way in Jerusalem, and he walks by the gates of the temple, and he saw something extraordinary, something that he would use to teach his disciples about giving. He saw a woman, and he saw her reach and grab 2 small copper coins and put in the treasury, the treasury of the Jews. In Mark chapter 12, verse 41 through verse 44, we read the story of this woman that in the midst of his depression about what was happening to Israel and the Jews brought a smile to his face. He's been crying out in the street thinking about all the Jews, and he turns around and he sees something extraordinary, and it captures his attention. That's an important thing and an important moment. Mark 12, 41 through 44 says, "And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money in the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, 'Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all of those who are contributing to the offering box.'" Now, I had a great time this week looking at what the treasury meant, about these offering boxes, about where they were inside the temple courts, and about what would happen as people gave their funds there. And I want to share a little bit of that with you. The temple had 3 courts. The gates all lined up in a row, and you could stand outside the first gate and you could look into the first courtyard, the courtyard of the Gentiles, the second courtyard, the courtyard for the women, and the third, the one for all the Jewish men. As he's looking in there, he catches a glimpse of something that brought him joy, but also was important in other ways. Verse 44 says, "For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she's ever had to live on." It's an amazing thing to see. In these 13 boxes, they would come in and they would bring their wealth to help for the upkeep of the temple, to rebuild the temple, to give the temple the things it needed to continue to be the house of God as it was for them. The first gate, you would come through and you would give alms. This was money designated for the sick, the poor, the old, the needy, and the widows. The people could line up there and they could take that money themselves. So they would line up in different places. They would wait for people to come by and they would say, "Do you have any alms?" And that was money that they had designated from all that they had to give to poorer people. And they would say, "I have alms." And they would come and give them. As they're walking through, if they gave away all that money, they would say, "Silver and gold have I none." You can probably think of a story from the text where that phrase is used. They'd let them know, "I don't have anything." That was the first court. That was at a gate called Beautiful. That was the primary entrance to the temple. Jesus was there at the temple gates when the offerings were being put in the boxes, and he watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Most people that came through the temple gave at least some money, and some gave great money. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus talks about how some would have people come and blow trumpets before they gave, making sure that everybody was watching the box. And then they would come and they would put their money in the box. And they'd look at everybody going, "Yeah, don't you wish you could give like me?" Well, I hope that's never the way we are. I'm thankful that I can't recall many times where I actually saw somebody putting the money in the box. I know you do, and I'm grateful for it, but you don't make much of a show out of it, and that's the way it ought to be. Rich people were throwing in large amounts, but a poor widow came, and she put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a fraction of a penny. I wonder what she could rebuild in the temple with that amount. A penny in our culture isn't worth very much, but it's worth about 1,200 times more than her penny in buying currency. The rich would throw them in the street because they were absolutely worthless. And I suspect at some point, especially if inflation keeps going up, we're going to start using our pennies to decorate with or something else, because they will be worth absolutely nothing and the nickels will be right behind them. This poor widow gave a very, very small gift. In fact, probably a minuscule gift. But it was everything that she had. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus pointed this out and said, "I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty. She put in everything, all that she had to live on." Jesus does some funny math right here. That penny, those 2 coins that make up one of their pennies, which was worth practically nothing, he says she gave the most. Not she gave a nicer gift, not that it really touched him. She gave the most of anyone else. I'm sure those people with trumpets playing so people would watch them give were going, "Now wait a second, I'm pretty sure I put more in the box." But he said she gave the most because she gave everything she had to live on. The historian Flavius Josephus, in his book called The War of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 5, discusses the various courts and how they were arranged in front of the temple and all about the giving boxes there. His description fits the gospel accounts of Mark 12 and Luke 21 seamlessly. We even see this described in the tabernacle as it talks about its courtyards in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. There are 3 courtyards. You come up to the beautiful gate, and it was a beautiful gate. Not because it was so impressive, but because it was the entrance to worship. It was the entrance to sacrifice. It was the entrance to prayer. It was the entrance to giving. It was the entrance to being with those who were faithful to God. And it was beautiful. And they would go up to this gate and go inside, and inside this gateway, it opened to a large courtyard, the largest of the courtyards. This was the courtyard for the Gentiles. It was the courtyard for praying for the world. It was the courtyard for teaching people outside of Judaism how to be Jews and involving them as proselytes into the Jewish faith. Gentiles could walk in. They could pray to God. This was the area Jesus cleansed earlier in our study. He walked in, and instead of having a place for prayer, they had a place for selling animals, exchanging money, all these things. They made it a business, and they had pushed out prayer. They had pushed out caring about the world and replaced it with an opportunity to make money in a way God never asked for nor wanted. This is where Jesus cleansed them out. The innermost court, we'll skip over the middle one. The innermost court was the courtyard. It was called the courtyard of the Jews, but it was only used for the Jewish men. And they could sit and watch the priests go about their duties from inside this courtyard. They could go and stand by this large open area, and they could see sacrifices being offered, and they could hear the things being said. In the middle, there was another courtyard. It was very large too. It was the courtyard for the Jewish women. I think it's interesting that Josephus said the courtyard for the women had way more people in it than any of the other courtyards. We understand that, don't we? Aren't you glad of all the faithful women that are going to come and the great things that they do? It was true of that time as well. It was divided by a wall and gate from the other two courts. The men would be in there as well, because the men are walking through this courtyard to get to their own special courtyard. But it was the courtyard that women could enter. At the first gate, you could give alms. At the beautiful gate. It was the entrance, and all the Gentiles that came in went through there. All the women, all the men. And it was for the special gift of giving to the poor, the invalids, and for the support of widows. God had a system for taking care of people in need. As folks would enter their place of worship, those who didn't have things knew they could show up, and the godly people would help them with what they needed. I've mentioned it before, but I have never been a member of a congregation as benevolent as this one. And I'm not saying that to be cute. I'm saying it miles more. And I think that's a great blessing, because we have been blessed, haven't we? It's only right that we help those who need things. And I'm grateful for Lawrence, who sort of heads all that up and does a lot of work with that. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and all that. But I don't want to be part of a congregation that doesn't give, especially to its own members. I think it's an important part of doing what we do, and it is pictured there at the beautiful gate. And that's the way I think about it. When we talk about benevolence, I go, oh, the beautiful gate. Yeah, that's what Christians, godly people, should do. Those in need would stay in this area, so those gathering to offer a sacrifice or to enter the court to pray would give alms to them directly. We see this in Acts 3, 1-3, and many other places. There are numerous examples in the Gospels and book of Acts about this kind of giving. You could stand inside this courtyard, and you could look and you could see into the courtyard of the women. In between the courtyard of the women and the courtyard of the Jewish men, there was another large gate. There was a box in the center of the gate. There were 6 boxes going down one side of the wall by the gate, six boxes going down by the other side. And what typically happened is people that were giving small gifts would go to the far sides, put their gift in. But oh, those who wanted to have their giving noticed, they walked right to the center. Bum, 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 bum. I am choosing to give my money at this time. Guys, bring out the shovels. Let's get it in here. They would brag about how much they could give. You could see them from every gate. No wonder in Matthew 6, Jesus talks against this, because it's horrific. I was once preaching at a congregation in Anichi-Nigwa, Nigeria. And right in front of the podium, they had a box bolted into the ground, sitting up on top of this table, and it was made of clear plastic. And people would come by and give in it. They began to find out that people would come by and they would put their hand in there if they didn't have any money and open it up and pretend like they were giving. So they made it clear so that everybody could see exactly what everybody gave. I about went nuts. That's horrible.
I grew up in a world where we had bags with handles on the side. We passed it hand to hand. We put our hand all the way in the bottom. We let it go. If a quarter clinked, you were in trouble, because no one was to know what you gave. Your right hand could not know what your left hand was doing, and I'm pretty sure your left couldn't know what the right was doing. It wasn't for show. This was right in the face of that kind of thinking. Those 13 money boxes were there. Women were allowed to come to the gate and give their gift as well. They could come and put their gift in. They just couldn't go into the next courtyard. But they could stand there at that point and give. And if someone was giving in the middle box, chances are you would see it in all the courtyards. According to Josephus and Tacitus, and it agrees with what Mark says, they called this giving to God's treasury. And it was for taking care of the temple. Things broke down. Things needed to be fixed. Things had to be perfect. They were working on it all of the time. And they would all give money to taking care of this thing. And it was considered to be the highest thing you could do in their culture. According to Mark and Luke, this widow did not come to give alms. She would have done that at that other gate. She came to give to the house of God, to give her gift to making the house of God better. Well, the rich were bringing in their big gifts. This widow brought 2 very small copper coins. She put it in the treasury box. 2 insignificant little coins that couldn't really buy anything. But she gave it because it's all she had. According to Matthew 23, verse 5, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees were doing things in the spirit of being seen, the spirit of receiving honor, praise, and glory from men. I'd almost like to be there just to watch the pomp and circumstance as people gave their gifts. I was talking to someone the other day, and they said their greatest desire in life was to have enough money to give a building to the college they went to and have a giant plaque with their name on it. And I said, well, that started off as a pretty cool thing. In the end, it's a little sad, I think. It's interesting to me that Jesus was standing nearby watching those who were giving to the temple. He was watching them as they gave, and he saw what they put in. I really believe he sees what we put in as well. He knows what we have, and I believe he sees what we put in as well. And you may think the box is a hidden thing. It's hidden from us. It's not hidden from him. It's obviously an important thing to him that giving be done, that it be done with the right heart. He spoke of the givers, saying, they all gave out of their wealth, but this widow gave out of her poverty. In the Greek, it says she gave everything. Everything. It staggered the Messiah. If we have a handful or a pocket full of money, we give several coins, then we're giving out of our surplus, out of our wealth. But if we are to open ourselves up and give everything away, we're giving out of our poverty. You know, this widow should have been at the front gate asking for alms, and she would have been right to do so. Instead, she's giving there at this important gate. Giving is an important subject to Jesus and the New Testament writers. If one were to read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Mark, each time Jesus spoke about giving and talked about money or about man's relationship with his possessions, he would find that approximately 25% of the Gospels was about how to handle the stuff God gives to you. It was about how money impacts us, and about how important giving is. It's a big deal. It's an important thing. The Bible gives much time to it, and Jesus makes it a very important focus of his ministry. We should be concerned less about the amount of our giving and concerned more with the spirit of our giving, like her. But the amount itself is important. Many times we judge people by the amount they give. I actually heard of a congregation not long ago, it's in the southeastern United States, where they listed in the bulletin. How about some of that? First of all, surely that's not legal even to do if someone doesn't want that, but they would put it in there to remind everybody to give. And I'm sure they had a pretty good collection. If we do it here, I'm gone, but I'm sure it made for a really big collection. I find it abhorrent, and it's completely against what God would say. But God does care about amount. Many times, and it seems that Jesus would judge people by the amount they gave. But more importantly, Jesus judged people by the amount they kept and what they had left over. Diane, I'm not going to say anything that will embarrass you. I don't know why you're throwing it at Patty, but that's between you and her. But I'm not going to embarrass you. I'm not going to mention it or anything. You should be grateful. Jesus judged people by what they had left over. I was working on this lesson last week, and that hit me hard. He judged them by what they gave out of their wealth, out of what they had, or what they gave out of their lack of wealth. In the Old Covenant, they were expected to tithe. But they also were expected to give continually through the year. The tithe, the 10%, was the absolute minimum you had to give. It was about percentages. 10%, you've got to give that. The 90% you have left, you're going to be giving a lot out of that. In fact, in the book called by Alfred Edersheim, called The Temple, which is one of the books I was reading for this study, he says that most faithful Jews gave up to 60 or so percent of what they had because tithing was minimal. And the whole idea behind it was you didn't want to be caught hoarding your wealth when God could use what you had. And I do believe in saving, and I do believe in all that, but if the important thing about you and your finances is what you can save for yourself, you really need to look at your heart, because Jesus expects us to give. I remember when I first heard about tithing, I said, "You mean you got to give a tenth of everything you have?" And my dad explained it to me. A tenth of the value of our home, a tenth of everything we were to give under the old law. And I went, "That's so much." And he said, "Oh no, giving as you're prospered, that's so much." The truth is, giving's important. As we think about our giving, we're going to have to determine if we can justify how much we give and how much we keep. Jesus criticized the Jewish leaders for their selfishness. We saw that in Matthew 23. But he praised this woman for her great gift. You can be poor, and you can give. And Jesus sees it as a tremendous amount. Remember how Paul bragged about those who were in poverty, giving to help those in Jerusalem? It's an important thing. Right after Jesus praises this widow for her giving, and this really isn't a lesson on giving, it's a lesson on this widow and on what took Jesus out of crying for Jerusalem and put him back on the track of, we need godly examples like this. In Mark chapter 13, verse 1 and verse 2, as he comes out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? There will be not left here one stone upon another. They'll all be thrown down." That giving that they were giving was given to make that incredible. That temple phenomenal. All those things so great. Jesus said, it's not going to matter. It's all going to be torn down. A disciple said, "Wow, look at these wonderful massive stones, these wonderful impressive buildings." And Jesus said, "Take a real good look. They're rocks, and they're going to get knocked down." There are three passages that tell us all about this event. Matthew 24, 1 through 2, Mark 13, 1 through 2, Luke 21, 5 through 6. It's exactly the same congregation in all these gospel accounts. The conversation Jesus had with the Pharisees, promising judgment on them, makes it clear that Jesus is talking about, in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, about a judgment on Jerusalem. He promises them, "I'm going to come back and I'm going to judge you for this. You are going to be judged for what you're doing." And he talks about how that will happen to them, those Pharisees. We will hear Jesus say in Luke 21:20 that those there that day, will see the city of Jerusalem surrounded by armies, and they will know that the desolation is there. Jesus even says that some of those there that day would see all this judgment happen. It's not talking about final judgment. It's talking about something they see with their eyes. And 40 years later, they see every wall, every brick of the temple. They see their city overrun, destroyed. They see their nation crumble as their capital falls by the Roman army surrounding them. And we're going to see it's what Daniel predicted, and it's what Jesus said would happen. The New Testament is filled with talk about what happens on the day of judgment. But this isn't it. He's going to talk about all the things that do not tell us when there's a day of judgment, because they happen all the time. He's going to say, you're going to hear wars and rumors of war. And people say, we've got wars. Obviously, the last day of judgment's coming. No, he says that's not the sign. There's always wars. There's always nations fighting nations. He's going to tell us what isn't the sign, and he's going to tell us what the sign is. And then he's going to tell us exactly what's going to happen. And that will be our lesson for next week. And I can tell you, I'm going to love going over those notes, because it's awesome. Let's pray to God together. Dear Father, I am so thankful we can be here today. Thankful to be with these godly people. Thankful to be with these people who give you so much of their time, their energy, their money, all the things they have, but especially their talents. Father, I pray that we will think about the percentages. That we'll think about what we keep for ourselves and what we give to you in your work. There's no one number for us in the new covenant, but we give as we're prospered. And Lord, for myself, I can say I'm really prospered. Father, I pray that we will have the heart of that widow. She wasn't looking for funds for herself. She was looking for those for others. She wanted to make the house of God a better place. Father, I'm thankful for the heart of Jesus as he weeps over Jerusalem. What happened in the year 70 is incredibly hard to think about. But the city of God falls. There will be a need for a new Jerusalem. And that will be seen in your church. And that's why we're here this morning. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.